Let's get straight to it. Early red flags. Frequent phone checks framed as just caring. Requests for passwords or full device access. Constant location updates. Where are you now? Reading tone into neutral messages, assuming subtext. Interrogating delays. Certainty replaces questions. Discouraging friends. They're a bad influence. Setting traps or ultimatums to test loyalty. Pushing past boundaries, then calling your reaction dramatic. You start second-guessing harmless choices and routines. If this sounds familiar, pause, document, and seek support. Most people experience jealousy, but normal jealousy has friction. It questions itself, it hesitates, it can be reassured. Delusional jealousy cannot. Clinically, this is known as Othello syndrome, a psychiatric condition where a person becomes convinced their partner is unfaithful despite a total lack of evidence. This is not a personality trait. It is not simple insecurity. It is a fixed, unshakable belief, impervious to logic or proof. And once a belief becomes fixed, contradiction often strengthens it. Othello syndrome is not a standalone diagnosis. It usually appears inside other conditions: delusional disorder, schizophrenia, alcohol-related disorders, neurological conditions, including forms of dementia. In clinical populations, it is rare, estimated at roughly 0.5 to 1.3%. But within certain psychiatric groups, it appears far more frequently. What makes it significant is not how common it is, but how strongly it correlates with harm, especially when combined with three factors: control, substance use, and a history of aggression. The psychology of certainty. To understand the risk, we must understand how the belief takes root and then hardens. Delusional jealousy does not arrive as random flashes. It develops as a system that slowly replaces curiosity with certainty. A polite conversation is interpreted as a secret relationship. A delayed reply is judged as meaningful deception. A passing glance is reclassified as undeniable evidence. Each neutral moment is filtered through a rigid story about betrayal. With repetition, the story stops feeling like a theory and starts feeling like reality. Inside this system, coincidence no longer exists. Reassurance is not reassurance, it is a tactic. Innocence is not possible, it is merely undiscovered guilt. Because every denial is taken as confirmation that there is something to hide, the loop tightens. As the loop tightens, anger begins to feel reasonable, then justified, and finally necessary. That is the mechanism we must interrupt. On its own, a belief does not create danger, but when belief combines with control, behavior changes. The phone is checked, messages are monitored, movements are tracked. At first, it can appear as concern, but over time, it becomes restriction. This pattern is known as coercive control. It includes monitoring communication, isolating a partner from friends and family, demanding constant updates on their location, regulating their behavior, appearance, or time. These are not isolated actions. They are a system designed to build a psychological prison, to reduce uncertainty and reinforce control. And when that control begins to slip, the system destabilizes. In 2013, Holly Gazzard, a vibrant 20-year-old hairdresser from Gloucester, entered a relationship with 22-year-old Asha Maslin. She was described by those around her as warm, social, and full of life. At first, the relationship followed a familiar destructive cycle. First came idealization, an overwhelming storm of affection psychologists call love bombing. But gradually, that intensity shifted. Maslin became controlling. He monitored her phone, questioned her whereabouts, accused her of things without evidence. Over time, the relationship became restrictive, then volatile, as he began to systematically erode her self-esteem. There is no confirmed diagnosis of Othello syndrome in this case, but the behavioral pattern, obsessive jealousy, control, and escalation, is well documented in high-risk domestic violence cases. The murder of 17-year-old Michelle Stewart in the UK shows a parallel progression, a campaign of stalking and harassment following a breakup, culminating in a frenzied stabbing. The perpetrator, like Maslin, also had a prior history of violence. The murder of 17-year-old Michelle Stewart in the UK shows a parallel progression, a campaign of stalking and harassment following a breakup, culminating in a frenzied stabbing. The perpetrator, like Maslin, also had a prior history of violence. In cases involving delusional jealousy and violence, there is frequently a history of prior aggression, and escalation accelerates after perceived rejection, not because jealousy always leads to violence, and one phase stands out above all others, the moment the relationship ends. When a controlling relationship ends, it does not always end psychologically. For someone grounded in reality, a breakup is painful, a loss. For someone driven by a delusion, it is confirmation, proof that the betrayal was real all along, proof that they were right. This is why separation is one of the highest risk periods in abusive relationships, because the loss of control intensifies the need to regain it, through contact, through pressure, through surveillance, or in extreme cases, through violence. Holly bravely ended the relationship. For Maslin, this was the ultimate confirmation of his delusion. His reaction was stalking, theft, and then explicit threats. He sent messages like, "I don't want to get F-word violent as I'll take it too far." Hours before the murder, he sent a final text, "I warned you all." On February 18, 2014, that escalation reached its endpoint. Asher Maslin sold a DVD player, used the money to purchase a 12-inch kitchen knife, and went to the salon where Holly worked. The attack was deliberate. He stabbed her 14 times. He later pleaded guilty to murder. The court noted the premeditated and merciless nature of the killing, as he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years. What happened was not a spontaneous act of passion. It followed a trajectory, a pattern that had been building for months. In rare cases, delusion does not remain isolated. It spreads. A condition known as folie à deux, or shared psychosis, occurs when two individuals adopt the same false belief system. Each reinforces the other, each removes doubt, and together they construct a reality that becomes increasingly detached from the outside world. A horrifying modern example is the case of Sabrina Kouida and Wissem Medouni. The couple developed a shared delusion that their nanny was colluding with an ex-boyfriend. That belief escalated into prolonged torture and ultimately murder, all to extract a confession to their fantasy, not because of evidence, but because their shared belief was never challenged. Delusional jealousy rarely appears in isolation. It grows where the brain is stressed or impaired. When frontal temporal systems that weigh evidence are compromised, ordinary moments feel charged. Signals seem louder than they are, and suspicion starts to feel like clarity. Dopamine-driven salience can mislabel neutral cues as meaningful, priming the mind to find patterns that are not there. Reassurance is recast as concealment. Harmless details begin to demand an explanation. Substances, especially alcohol, lower inhibition and shorten the pause before accusation, increasing irritability and risk. After drinking, accusations can surface faster, with less ability to pause or reconsider, and conversations spiral more quickly. Sleep deprivation and chronic stress fuel hypervigilance. The 3 a.m. scan for patterns, the compulsion to check, the blurring of boundaries. Cognitive rigidity, whether from illness, injury, or entrenched thinking, locks conclusions in place. Counter-evidence is reorganized as proof. In daily life, these pressures look like controlling surveillance, incessant checking, rapid accusations, escalation after a breakup, and threatening texts. In Asher Maslin's pattern, monitoring, accusations, stalking, and explicit threats followed separation. He later stabbed Holly 14 times at her workplace. Biology does not excuse harm. but it explains why certainty can feel immovable and why treatment must address the brain as well as the behavior. Not all jealousy is dangerous, and some tension is normal. What matters are patterns that raise risk. Certain signs appear again and again in high-risk situations. Several were present in the Maslin-Gazzard case. Persistent, baseless accusations, repeated certainty despite disproof, as seen in Asher Maslin's repeated allegations toward Holly before the attack. Coercive control, rules, monitoring, isolation, appeared here as Maslin checked devices, demanded access, and restricted movement. Invasions of privacy, scrolling messages, tracking apps, escalate vigilance and fear, as with Maslin's device monitoring. These actions reinforce a fixed belief and shrink autonomy. Rapid idealization to devaluation, soulmate to contempt when reassurance fails, was also reported before Holly ended the relationship. Volatile anger, doors slammed, objects broken, intimidation, paired with imagined betrayal and explicit threats in Maslin's messages. Escalation after separation, stalking, surveillance, coincidences, showing up at work, mirrored Maslin's stalking and threats as messages intensified. Digital harassment, rapid-fire texts, new accounts after blocks, spoofed numbers, aligned with Maslin's repeated escalating communications. Safety planning red flags, explicit threats, violating orders, tracking routes, substance-fueled rages, stacked in this case. The convergence ended in a stabbing at Holly's salon, when multiple signs accumulate. Accusations, control, surveillance, threats, prioritize safety, document incidents, create distance, lean on support networks, and contact authorities. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this condition is why reassurance does not work. The answer is simple. The belief is not built on evidence. It is built on conviction. And conviction does not respond to logic. It reorganizes logic. Every explanation becomes manipulation. Every contradiction becomes concealment. Which means the more someone tries to prove their innocence, the more the system adapts to preserve their guilt. This is why these situations often feel impossible to resolve from within. Understanding the pattern allows for interruption. In clinical settings, treatment focuses on the underlying condition. Antipsychotic medication may reduce delusional intensity. Therapy can help challenge belief structures. Substance use treatment is often critical. But outside of a clinical environment, the priority is safety, documentation, distance, support networks. Because once escalation reaches a certain point, reason is no longer the primary tool. Protection is. Cases like Holly Gazzard's are often remembered for a single, brutal event. But they are not defined by a moment. They are defined by a pattern, a progression that begins quietly, becomes controlling, then restrictive, then volatile, and in rare tragic cases ends in irreversible harm. Othello syndrome represents one extreme, where belief fully detaches from reality, but the broader lesson is not limited to a diagnosis. It is about recognizing when emotion becomes certainty, when certainty becomes control, and when control begins to escalate. Because by the time the final moment arrives, the pattern has already been in motion for a long time, and recognizing that pattern early is where prevention begins.